Today, we have had 9 hours and 35 minutes of daylight. That in contrast or comparison to the shortest day of the year when we had 9 hours and 8 minutes of daylight. 27 more minutes of daylight today. It's getting lighter, even if by minuscule amounts. We've even had some sun in the last days. It feels like a little more than in past years at this time. But it is still an acutely dark time of year. Physical darkness and cold, and often, for many of us, a rough emotional time. I have to admit that each January, right around now, I do wonder why I live here as I shiver and layer on 14 layers of flung underwear, wool socks, and the like, and then I'll head to the cemetery in the wind. Today, this week, is dark in Torah, too. Our ancestors are in Egypt. They're on the cusp of the Exodus, and what they witness is God's wonders, or to the Egyptians, their plagues. Moses and Aaron go back and forth with Pharaoh, let my people go. He says no, God brings on a plague. You remember that exchange. Everybody's getting angry. The plagues keep coming, and after the locusts, the 8th plague, are gone, God brings on, anyone? Darkness on the Egyptians. So here's what the Torah says. I have to say, I've read this I don't know how many hundreds of times, and I took it differently this year. God says to Moses, hold out your arm over the sky to bring darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. That is different than just, well, they didn't turn out the lights, they didn't have light switches, but different than just nighttime darkness. So Moses does this, and there's 3 days of complete darkness across Egypt. The rabbis say that actually Torah says people couldn't even see one another. They couldn't move about. But the Israelites, our ancestors, had light in their homes. 3 pretty powerful verses. The rabbis in the Midrash parallel this plague of darkness with hell or Gehinnom. Yes, we do have hell, not officially delineated, but we do have it in Jewish teachings. And they said that they compare that to the darkness that existed before God said, Yehi or, let there be light, in the creation of the world. And as one commentary says, just as the light of Shabbat is a foretaste of the world to come, the reward that awaits the righteous, the darkness of the 9th plague is a foretaste of Gehinnom, or hell, they might say, but the rabbis say Gehinnom, the punishment that awaits those who truly cannot see their neighbors, those who cannot feel the pain of their neighbors or recognize the dignity of their afflicted neighbors. Now, I'm not big into divine punishment, but that text is pretty powerful. Punishment for not being able to see the pain of our neighbors or to give them dignity. Another commentary takes it differently, noting that perhaps the plague was a spiritual or psychological darkness or depression. Perhaps the Egyptians were depressed by the series of calamities, understandably, that struck them down, or maybe by the realization of how much their own comfort depended on the enslavement of the Israelites. Commentator says, the person who cannot see their neighbor is incapable of spiritual growth and incapable of rising from where they are currently. This commentary is called very loudly to me this week, both in winter and in light of the last 104 days. We have around us, if not physical, we have a horrific darkness that we can touch, we can feel. We have a darkness that is often an inability to see our neighbors. And even a darkness that causes many to feel an inability to move and perhaps be depressed. Perhaps you read the essay published a couple weeks ago by Wharton professor and psychologist Adam Grant. He was published on New Year's Day about what we are feeling now. Grant wrote that in mid-October, a few days after the attack on Israel, he got a text from a friend who was getting dark. That's weird. I did not. Todd, are you doing that in the back? Okay. You guys doing that up there? No, it's okay, Dave. We're good. That was free. Oh, there's a Divic in the sanctuary. Okay. Grant writes about a couple of friends and colleagues, one who said they were struggling so hard with the news and struggling to feel useful and said, what can I even do? What matters? And how others of us have felt defeated and outraged and often felt like there was indifference around us, that people were not acting. And Grant wrote, a common conclusion is that people just didn't care. But he explained, inaction isn't always caused by apathy. We don't need more light, or I'm okay. We're good. He said inaction isn't always caused by apathy, but it might be caused by empathy. Grant, who's a psychologist, says more specifically it can be the result of what psychologists call empathic distress, hurting for others, taking on others' hurt, and feeling unable to help. And so he described what so many of us felt and feel, helpless, powerless, overwhelmed, perhaps even avoiding the news or changing the subject. Grant continues that empathic distress explains why many people have checked out in the wake of these tragedies. The small gestures that they wanted to make or that they could make seemed like an exercise in futility. Giving to charity often feels like a drop in the ocean. Posting on social media is poking a hornet's nest. And so for many, concluding that nothing they do will make a difference, they start to become indifferent. What's interesting is he contrasts empathy or empathic distress with compassion, saying very clearly they're not the same, though they're often used interchangeably. Empathy absorbs someone's emotions as our own, saying, I'm hurting for you. And compassion focuses on someone else's emotions. In other words, I see that you're hurting. I'm here for you. He cites two neuroscientists who did a study in which they taught their participants to respond with compassion instead of empathy. And in that study, they found that a different neural network opened up when they offered comfort versus taking on someone else's pain. And so, he explains, there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that compassion is healthier for us and being kinder to others than taking on empathy. You know what, Dave? I can't. I'm sorry. We're okay. I appreciate the offer. It's just, Merle, sorry, it's too much. I'm sorry, but thank you. I appreciate it. So what Grant teaches is that when we see others in pain, instead of taking on overload and retreating, we should take on compassion. We should offer to reach out and help. What does he mean? We shouldn't try to make someone's distress go away, but we should acknowledge it. We should name it. We should say, I hear you, I see you. Interestingly, Grant cites a psychologist, Susan Silk, who, as some of you may have read about over the years, Silk has published what is often called the ring theory. She says, to figure out who needs your support after something terrible happens, psychologist Susan Silk suggests picturing a dartboard. Okay, think of the target, with the people closest to the trauma in the bullseye and those more peripherally affected in the outer rings. So, for example, the victims of violence in Gaza and in Israel are in the center. Their immediate family and closest friends are in the ring outside of that. The local community is in the next ring. And then it's followed by people in other communities who share an identity or an affiliation. So she teaches, once you've figured out, and Grant teaches, once you've figured out where you are in those rings, where you are in that dartboard or target, you should look for support from people outside, who are farther outside the circle, and offer support in. So you should reach out with compassion to people who are closest to the distress, but also look for help and support from those who are farther out than yourself. And Grant teaches then, if we notice that people in our lives are seeming disengaged around something that matters to us, we might consider what else they might be carrying. And instead of just demanding that they do more, perhaps we should offer them compassion. Show them compassion and help them find compassion for themselves. Indeed, that small gesture of kindness won't end the crisis in the Middle East, but it can help someone else and can give us the strength to move. This is, of course, one small piece, but only one. And I don't off-cite this blithely or glibly, aware that the challenge of events in the world devastation in Israel, and the emotional darkness of the season, we carry a lot. And I remind all of us that if those feelings could be beyond what Grant describes, if they're overwhelming, if they're insurmountable or unchanging, then we need more help. It's more than going outside the rings. And I invite anyone who's feeling feelings beyond that to look to professionals, whether it's a therapist, whether it's us to help you connect to therapists, whether it's JCFS. Some of you may be familiar with an amazing, relatively new organization in this area called No Shame on You, which aims to remove the stigma on mental health and help people find the treatment that they need, the help. Or Erica's Lighthouse, an incredible organization on the North Shore, the goal of light, lifting light, putting light onto darkness, onto depression, to suicidal thoughts, and to give help. These are matters we take seriously, and we, your clergy, are always here to start a conversation with you or to help you find resources that you need. So here we are, January 19th, with just over 9.5 hours of daylight, looking toward more light each day. In another recent essay, the author Roger Rosenblatt commented, actually he posted online the other day and said, "Oh, you should all have messed up your New Year's resolutions by now. Everyone's probably broken their resolutions." First I thought he was just being cynical, but then I thought, Rosenblatt challenges us to go beyond making milquetoast resolutions. Oh, I'm gonna, go to the gym more or eat more lettuce or something, and said instead we should make airtight commitments. He says the task of improving the world may seem impossible, or parallels Grant a little bit, but it's not. He believes that we should make decisions, discrete decisions, that what he calls decisions are resolutions with teeth. And he tells the story of one of his editors. He says, an editor of mine told me a story from his childhood on his grandparents' farm in Iowa. The little boy, looking out over acres and acres of corn, asked his grandfather, "How are we going to shuck all that corn?" His grandfather said, "1 row at a time." This, too, is how to improve the world, he teaches, and we can start small. So Rosenblatt asks, and I share his words, but invite you to the same questions. He asks, what will you do right now, this week, this month, to make a better world? Stage a protest, send a letter to right a wrong or to proffer friendship, lend a hand, offer a word of comfort or inspiration or support or love, donate money, or most valuable of all, time. There are so many ways to move this world right within our reach. So as I conclude, I invite you to come back to Torah for one more moment or two. Recall that there were 3 days of the plague of darkness. People could not see one another. In a Talmudic discussion that probably some of you in the room have studied, there's a Jewish legal discussion defines how early one can start the morning prayers. Anyone know how dawn is defined? When you can recognize the face of a friend or a neighbor. When one sees other people and can recognize them, the darkness has begun to lift. So as our days become longer and the physical light grows each day, we have before us an opportunity to increase our spiritual and emotional light, 1 row at a time, 1 act at a time, 1 decision at a time, 1 expression of compassion at a time. We can allow ourselves to be seen and heard. We can empower ourselves to be a bit stronger and acknowledge a bit more compassion each day. In our morning prayers, we end the Yotzer, the prayer for light, with Baruch Atah Adonai Oseh Ma'aseh V'Reishit. Blessed are you, God, who creates the lights of creation. We praise God for creating light. So let's partner with God, the creator of light, and create and urge forward our own light so that we can see the faces of our neighbors and they can see ours. Shabbat Shalom.